For more than 100 years, humanity has been calling out into the darkness without ever knowing who might be listening at the other end. Every radio signal, every broadcast, every television image we have ever sent into the air did not simply fade away. It escaped upward, out through the thin skin of our atmosphere, and then kept going, at the speed of light, in every direction at once. In this very moment, as you follow these words, a growing bubble of voices is expanding around our small blue planet, a sphere of human noise that swells by another 300,000 kilometers with every passing second. We have shouted our existence to the galaxy, louder and louder, decade after decade, and almost no one ever stopped to ask whether that was wise. Because out there, beyond the last light we know, something might be waiting, and it is possible that we have just done the one thing you should never do in a dark and unfamiliar forest. We have drawn attention to ourselves. If the great questions of the universe fascinate you as much as they fascinate us, then leave a like and subscribe. It would really mean a great deal to us. Picture a forest in the middle of the night. No moon, no starlight filtering through the leaves, only a blackness so complete that you cannot make out your own hand in front of your face. You do not know what moves between the trees. You hear no sound, and yet you feel, somehow, that you are not alone. What would you do? Would you call out? Would you light a torch and shout, "Here I am, come closer, let us talk"? Or would you hold your breath, make yourself small, place each step with care, and hope that nothing notices you? Almost every human being would choose the second instinct without thinking. We carry that caution deep within us, an ancient inheritance from a time when becoming visible at the wrong moment could mean death. And it is exactly this image, stretched across the unimaginable stage of the cosmos, that lies at the heart of one of the most unsettling ideas ever conceived about our place among the stars. It is called the dark forest theory. Before we step deeper into that forest, we have to begin with a simple but strange observation. The universe is old, far larger than the mind can truly hold, and filled with hundreds of billions of galaxies, each of which in turn contains hundreds of billions of stars. If even a tiny fraction of those stars are circled by planets, and we now know that planets are everywhere, then there are more worlds in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on every beach on Earth. With numbers like that, it seems almost inevitable that life did not arise only once. Somewhere, perhaps in countless places, there should be others. Other eyes lifted toward their own skies. Other minds asking the same questions we ask. And if life is common, and if even a small portion of it ever grew clever enough to build and to wonder, then the galaxy should be humming with activity. It should be crowded with signals, with travelers, with the slow handiwork of civilizations far older than our own. And yet, when we turn our great dishes toward the sky and listen, we hear nothing. No greeting, no whisper, no deliberate signal from any of those countless worlds. Only the soft static of the cosmos itself, the faint hiss left over from the birth of everything, and the natural crackle of stars and dust. This is the contradiction that has haunted thoughtful people for generations. The universe looks as though it should be full of life, and yet everywhere we point our instruments, it answers us with silence. We have given that silence a name. We call it the Great Silence, and the puzzle it presents is one of the deepest in all of science. If they are out there, where is everybody? There is no shortage of possible answers, and each of them changes the meaning of that silence entirely. Perhaps life truly is rare, far rarer than the sheer number of worlds would suggest, and the leap from lifeless chemistry to a living, thinking creature is so improbable that it has happened only a handful of times across the whole expanse of the cosmos. Perhaps intelligence is rarer still, a fragile and fleeting thing that flickers into being and then extinguishes itself before it can ever reach across the gulf between the stars. Perhaps the distances are simply too vast, the time windows too narrow, and two civilizations could rise and fall 1,000 light-years apart and never once overlap long enough to find each other. Or perhaps, and this is the possibility that should make us pause, the silence is not an accident at all. Perhaps the universe is quiet because everyone who is out there has decided, deliberately and wisely, to stay quiet. Perhaps they are not absent, perhaps they are hiding. This is where the dark forest theory steps out of the shadows and offers its chilling explanation. Imagine that the universe is not an empty expanse waiting to be explored, but a vast forest at night, dense and silent, and full of life you cannot see. In that forest moves every civilization that has ever risen, each one a hunter, careful and quiet, slipping between the trees. Some of these hunters are gentle, some are fearful, and some may be cruel, but the forest itself does not let you tell which is which. Because here is the cruelty at the center of the idea. When one hunter encounters another in the dark, it cannot know the stranger's intentions. It cannot see a face, cannot read a heart, cannot sit down for a conversation that would take 1,000 years to complete in each direction. All it knows is that something else is out there, something that can think, and therefore something that might one day pose a threat. And in a forest where you cannot be certain, the safest move, the move that guarantees your own survival, is to remain unseen and to eliminate anything that reveals itself before it can do the same to you. To understand why a thinking creature might reach such a grim conclusion, you have to follow the logic step by step, the way it was laid out by those who first imagined it. Two things drive the dark forest, and both of them sound reasonable on their own. The first is simply the will to continue existing. Almost everything that lives wants to keep living, and a civilization is no different. Its deepest instinct, beneath all its art and science and dreaming, is to survive. The second is the brutal arithmetic of growth. Life expands. It reaches for resources. It fills the space available to it. And given enough time, any civilization that keeps growing will need more than its own small corner of the cosmos can provide. Take those two drives, the will to survive and the tendency to expand, and place them inside a universe where you can never truly know the mind of a stranger across the void, and something dark begins to crystallize. Now add the piece that turns caution into dread. Across the immense distances between the stars, you cannot communicate quickly enough to build trust. A message sent today might not arrive for centuries, and the reply, if there is one, would take centuries more to return. In that time, anything could change. A civilization that seems peaceful when its signal departs could become something else entirely by the time the answer comes back. A people that look primitive and harmless today might leap ahead in a few thousand years and tower over you tomorrow. You cannot watch them. You cannot pause them. You cannot verify a single promise they make. And so, the reasoning goes, the only rational stance toward an unknown civilization is suspicion, and the only safe response to a revealed presence is to strike before that presence has a chance to grow into a danger you can no longer stop. This is the heart of the dark forest. Not malice, but fear. Not hatred, but the cold logic of a creature that has decided it cannot afford to be wrong. It is worth stopping here, before we go any further, to say something honest and important. The dark forest is not an established fact. It is not a law of nature confirmed by experiment, not a finding that scientists have tested in a laboratory and written across their chalkboards as settled truth. It is a hypothesis, a single possible answer among many, to the question of why the sky is silent. It is a story we tell to make sense of an absence, and like all such stories, it could be entirely wrong. Perhaps the universe is not a dark forest at all. Perhaps it is closer to an empty meadow, quiet simply because there is hardly anyone there. Perhaps it is a place where the few who exist would welcome a new voice with wonder rather than fear. We do not know, and we should hold this idea the way we hold any powerful thought that cannot yet be proven, with curiosity, with caution, and with the humility to admit how little we truly understand. But even as a hypothesis, the dark forest is worth taking seriously, because it forces us to ask a question we have been strangely reluctant to confront. If there is even a chance that the forest is dark, then what exactly have we been doing for the last 100 years? The answer is that we have been making noise, a great deal of it, and most of it we never meant to send at all. From the moment we learned to broadcast radio waves across our own planet, we also began, without intending to, broadcasting them into space. Every transmission that bounced between cities also leaked upward, slipping past the atmosphere and spilling outward into the dark at the speed of light. The first faint murmurs of our radio age departed Earth more than a century ago and have been traveling ever since, washing over star after star, a thin and expanding shell of human chatter. Around our planet, there now exists an invisible bubble, a sphere of leaked signals roughly 200 light-years across, and it grows a little larger with every heartbeat. Anywhere within that bubble, in principle, a sufficiently patient and sensitive listener could catch the echo of our presence. Not our words, perhaps, not clearly, for the signals weaken and blur as they spread, drowning slowly in the natural noise of the galaxy. But the fact of us, the unmistakable mark of something artificial, something that does not occur by chance in nature, that mark is out there, riding the light, announcing that here, on this one small world, something learned to speak. And then there are the messages we sent on purpose. In 1974, from a great dish carved into the hills of an island, we aimed a deliberate signal at a dense cluster of stars far across the galaxy, a tight knot of more than 100,000 suns in the constellation of Hercules, some 25,000 light-years away. It was a short burst of carefully arranged pulses, a kind of cosmic postcard, sketching out the numbers we count by, the chemistry of our bodies, the shape of the creatures who made it, and the little world we call home. It was less a true attempt at conversation than a demonstration of what we could do, a way of proving to ourselves that we had reached the point where we could reach out at all. The message will not arrive at its distant target for 25,000 years, and any reply would take just as long to return, which means that no one alive today, nor anyone for hundreds of generations, will ever know if it was heard. But it left us all the same. It is out there now, crossing the dark, a small bright thought flung toward the stars. We did something else too, something quieter and stranger, and, in its own way, more intimate. We attached golden records to a pair of small spacecraft and sent them drifting out of the solar system altogether. Two slow messengers carrying a portrait of our world, etched into metal, meant to last 1 billion years. On those discs we placed the sounds of Earth, the calls of whales and birds, the rush of wind and surf, greetings spoken in dozens of human languages, music gathered from across our cultures, and instructions, as best we could devise them, for how a stranger might read what we had left. We did not really know how an alien mind would decipher such a thing, since even we struggle to agree on what any of it means. But there was something deeply human in the gesture, a refusal to vanish silently, a wish to say, before the dark closes over us, that we were here, that we loved, that we sang, that we looked up and wondered. These records will outlast every monument we have ever built. Long after our cities have crumbled and our names are forgotten, they will still be coasting through the emptiness, carrying the memory of a small blue world toward stars we will never see. It was against this backdrop of cheerful, hopeful broadcasting that one of the great minds of our age raised a warning that still echoes uncomfortably. He pointed out that we did not have to look very far to imagine how a meeting between two civilizations of unequal power might unfold. We needed only to look at our own history. When a stronger people has encountered a weaker one on our own planet, the result has rarely been gentle. He suggested that announcing our presence to the cosmos so loudly and so casually might be, to put it plainly, a serious mistake, and that perhaps we ought to be more cautious about advertising ourselves to a universe whose temperament we cannot possibly know. He was not claiming to have proof of danger. He was simply asking us to consider the risk before we kept shouting, to weigh the possibility that not everyone who hears us will be a friend. It is a sobering thought from someone who spent his life studying the cosmos, and whether or not he was right, the question he raised deserves an honest answer rather than a shrug. But here is the part that makes the whole dilemma so strange, and in a way so hopeless. Even if we agreed right now to fall completely silent, to switch off every transmitter and stop sending deliberate messages forever, we would still be visible. Because the truth is that we do not need to send anything at all to be noticed. A living, thriving, technological world betrays itself in a dozen different ways, and many of those signals have nothing to do with radio. We give ourselves away simply by existing, by burning, by breathing, by being warm and bright and alive in a cold and empty dark. To understand just how exposed we really are, we have to look at our planet the way a distant observer would, patient and clever, and equipped with instruments perhaps far beyond our own, and ask what they would actually see. The first thing they might notice is our light. When night falls across our world, we do not let the darkness take it. We push back against it, with a glittering web of artificial light, our cities glowing like scattered embers, our coastlines traced in fire, whole continents outlined in the brightness we have made. To us, standing beneath it, this is ordinary. But to an observer with a sharp enough eye, a planet that lights up on its dark side is profoundly unnatural. Worlds do not glow by themselves where the sun does not reach them. A night side that shines is the signature of something deliberate, something that has tamed energy and bent it to its will. We are, in a very real sense, a string of lights hung in the darkness, a decoration that no natural process would ever produce, quietly announcing that this world is not asleep. And even if we extinguished every lamp, even if we plunged ourselves into total darkness, we would still glow, only in a color our eyes cannot see. Everything that exists, every object warmer than the deepest cold of space, radiates heat. It is a basic truth of the physical world, captured in a simple and elegant law of nature, that the warmer a thing is, the more energy it pours out into its surroundings, mostly as infrared light, the invisible glow of warmth. Our buildings hold heat, our machines shed it, our whole bustling civilization runs hot, and all of that warmth leaks steadily into space as a faint infrared shimmer. A distant astronomer might never see a single one of our lamps and still detect that our world is dissipating energy in a way that does not quite match a simple, lifeless rock. They might notice a thermal fingerprint, an anomaly, a planet that seems to be running a little warmer and a little busier than it has any natural right to be. We cannot cheat the heat. We cannot hide the fact that we are burning. But the most damning signature of all is not our light or our heat. It is our air. Life, it turns out, does not just inhabit a world, it transforms it. Over billions of years, the living things of Earth have rebuilt our atmosphere from the inside out, filling it with gases that simply would not be there if the planet were dead. And this is the great betrayal, the thing we can do nothing about, because it can be read across staggering distances. When a planet passes in front of its star from the viewpoint of a distant observer, a thin sliver of that star's light filters through the planet's atmosphere on its way across space. And that light carries information. By splitting it apart and studying it carefully, the way a prism unfolds white light into a rainbow, a sufficiently advanced observer could read the chemistry of our air the way you might read words on a page. They would see oxygen, abundant and reactive. They would see traces of methane, and they would understand at once that something is deeply strange because those two gases should not be able to exist together for long. Methane and oxygen react with each other. Left alone, they would burn away to nothing in a geological instant. If both are present in our air at the same time, something must be constantly replenishing them, pumping them back into the atmosphere as fast as they are destroyed. And the only thing we know of that can do that, the only engine capable of holding an atmosphere so far out of its natural balance, is life itself. This chemical imbalance is what scientists call a biosignature, and it is, in a sense, the smell of life drifting across the cosmos. Before anyone goes looking for a world full of creatures, they first look for the gentle disequilibrium that life leaves behind, the telltale mixture of gases that no dead planet could maintain. We do exactly this ourselves. When we hunt for life beyond our solar system, we do not search blindly. We first look for planets in the comfortable zone around a star, where it is neither so hot that water boils away, nor so cold that it freezes solid, the narrow band where liquid water, and perhaps life, might endure. And then, on the most promising of those worlds, we try to sniff their air for the signatures of biology. Any civilization clever enough to look back at us would do the same. And when they turned their instruments toward our small blue world, they would find an atmosphere practically shouting that something here is alive. We have been broadcasting that message for billions of years, long before we ever built a single radio, and we have no way to stop, because to stop would mean to stop living. The method that makes this possible, the trick of catching a planet as it crosses the face of its star, is the very same one we have used to find thousands of worlds around other suns. It is beautifully simple in principle. When a planet passes between us and its star, it blocks a tiny fraction of that star's light, and the star appears to dim, just slightly, for a little while. Plot that brightness over time and you see a small dip in the curve, a shallow valley that appears as the planet crosses and then climbs back as it moves away. From the depth and the shape and the rhythm of that dip, we can learn the size of the planet, the length of its year, and, if we look carefully at different colors of light, even the makeup of its air. This single technique has revealed more distant worlds than any other, thousands upon thousands of them, and it works just as well in reverse. There is a particular region of space, a thin band of stars positioned just so, from which our own planet can be seen crossing the face of the sun. Astronomers have mapped it, this corridor of stars that has the perfect vantage point to watch Earth transit, and they have counted thousands of stars within a few hundred light-years that sit in exactly the right place to catch us in the act. If anyone is watching from there, they have a front-row view of our planet passing before our star, again and again, year after year, dimming the sunlight by the faintest measurable amount, and leaving, in that dimming, the unmistakable fingerprint of a living world. So we arrive at an uncomfortable conclusion. Our planet does not have a single signature. It has many. We can be detected as a planet in the habitable zone, as a living planet, perhaps as an inhabited planet, and perhaps most revealing of all, as a technological one. To truly hide the Earth, you would have to hide its shadow, its light, its warmth, its atmosphere, its chemistry, and its restless electronic chatter, all at once. And it is precisely here, faced with this seemingly impossible task, that a genuinely astonishing idea enters the story. An idea proposed not as a joke, but in a serious scientific paper, asking a question almost no one had thought to ask. If a civilization truly wanted to disappear, could it? Could you in fact build a cloaking device for an entire planet? A little over a decade ago, two astrophysicists sat down with this exact problem and worked it out with real numbers, in a paper that imagined how a planet might erase itself from the most powerful detection method we know. Their reasoning began with the transit, that small dip in starlight as a world crosses its sun. The dip is what gives a planet away. So, they asked, what if you could fill it in? What if, at the precise moment the Earth passed in front of the sun and our star appeared to dim, we fired a beam of light outward, aimed carefully at the watching observer, with exactly the right brightness to replace the light the planet was blocking. To anyone measuring our star, the dip would vanish. The brightness would hold perfectly steady. No dip, no transit. No transit, no planet detected. In effect, they proposed a kind of cosmic makeup, a way of painting over our own shadow with a carefully tuned beam of light, smoothing the telltale signal until it disappeared entirely. It sounds like fantasy, but the remarkable thing is how modest the requirements turned out to be. To erase our transit at a single color of light, the kind of simple dimming an ordinary telescope would measure, they calculated that you would need a laser running at something like 30 megawatts, firing for only a handful of hours each year, during the brief windows when the Earth actually crosses the sun, as seen from a given direction. 30 megawatts is a great deal of power by everyday standards, but on the scale of a technological civilization, it is almost trivial. It is roughly the output of a cluster of large wind turbines spinning at full strength. This is not the unthinkable energy of some vast star-encircling megastructure. It is the kind of power we already generate without much difficulty. A large orbiting laser, switched on only when needed, could in principle smooth away our shadow and leave us looking, to a simple observer, like an empty patch of sky. But the universe, as always, makes things more complicated. A simple cloak only works against a simple instrument. A truly careful observer would not just measure whether our star dims, they would split its light into all its colors and study how the dimming changes from one wavelength to the next, because that is precisely how you read an atmosphere. To hide from that kind of scrutiny, you would need to compensate not at one color, but across the whole spectrum, matching the dip in every shade of light at once. And the paper estimated that this fuller, chromatic cloak would demand something closer to 250 megawatts. More, certainly, but still well within the reach of a civilization only modestly ahead of our own. And there is an even cleverer option, one that turns the whole problem on its head. Instead of hiding the entire planet, you could hide only the parts that reveal life. You could let them see the world, let them see a rock crossing a star, but quietly erase the chemical signatures of biology, the oxygen and the methane, the smell of something alive. You would not vanish. You would simply appear dead. To a hunter in the dark forest, a barren and lifeless rock is far less interesting, far less threatening, and far less worth destroying than a world teeming with the very thing that might one day reach back. And then comes the twist that makes the idea genuinely beautiful, because the very same tool that could hide us could also be used to do the exact opposite. The authors pointed out that if you can add light to fill in a transit, you can also add light to shape it, to sculpt the dip into something it could never naturally be. When a planet crosses its star, the dimming follows a smooth and predictable curve, gentle as it begins, level at its lowest, gentle again as it ends. But with a precisely controlled beam, you could deliberately distort that curve, carving notches into it, adding pulses at exact intervals, writing patterns into the starlight that no orbiting world could ever produce on its own. You could encode a sequence of prime numbers, those strange numbers divisible only by themselves, and one, a pattern that nature never generates by accident, and that any mathematician anywhere would instantly recognize as the work of a mind. An observer studying our transit would see at once that this was no ordinary planet. The signal would be too regular, too clever, too obviously designed. They would know, beyond any doubt, that someone was standing at the switch, flashing a message in the language of light. This flips the entire question inside out. The transit of the Earth across the Sun, the very thing we might want to hide, could instead become a doorway, a natural and perfectly timed opportunity to announce ourselves to anyone watching from the right direction. Because here is the clever part. When a distant observer catches our planet crossing the Sun, that is the exact moment we know they have their eyes on us. That is when their instruments are pointed our way, when they are gathering every scrap of information our small world has to offer. And so, if we ever wish to speak, that would be the perfect instant to do it, to slip a deliberate signal into the starlight precisely when we know someone is looking. The same shadow that could betray us could, with a little ingenuity, be turned into a beacon. Whether that is wisdom or folly depends entirely on what kind of forest we live in. Of course, none of this amounts to a true cloak of invisibility, the sort that wraps a thing in perfect concealment, as if by magic. The laser trick is narrow and specific. It defeats one particular method of detection, aimed at one particular observer in one particular direction. It does nothing about all the other ways a world can be found. Even if we erased our transit, a determined searcher could still detect the faint gravitational wobble our planet induces in the Sun, the tiny tug that betrays an unseen companion. They could measure the minuscule shift in the star's position as we swing around it. They could catch us by the subtle bending of light, or, given instruments far beyond ours, simply by gathering enough of our own reflected glow to see us directly, a faint mote of blue beside a blazing star. We have found distant worlds by every one of these methods, clumsily and at the very edge of our ability, and if we can manage it at all, then a civilization far older and far cleverer than us could surely do it better. The honest truth is that hiding from one set of eyes does not hide you from all of them. To vanish completely, you would have to defeat every method of detection at once, including the ones no one has even thought of yet. And yet, for all our exposure, there is a strange and quiet comfort waiting in the very thing that makes the cosmos so daunting: distance. The scales of space are so absurdly, almost incomprehensibly vast that even a planet shouting at the top of its lungs becomes, across the gulf between the stars, little more than the faintest pinprick in an ocean of darkness. Our signals do not travel through space unchanged. They spread, and as they spread they thin, weakening with every light year until they sink slowly beneath the natural murmur of the galaxy itself. To pluck a clear human voice out of that fading whisper from many light years away, an observer would need an instrument of staggering sensitivity, a dish of impossible size and patience, straining to separate our faint signal from the roar of stars and the hiss of empty space. We are loud, yes, but only up close. Step back far enough, and we become a needle in a haystack the size of a world, a candle flickering somewhere on a darkened continent. The universe is not just large, it is so large that its very size becomes a kind of accidental shelter. There is another mercy hidden in those distances, and it has to do with time. Because light itself takes so long to cross space, Anyone looking at us from far away is never seeing us as we are. They are seeing us as we were. A civilization 100 light-years distant, watching our world this very night, would not witness our present moment at all. They would see the Earth as it was a century ago, catching the first faint murmurs of our radio age, knowing nothing of what we have become since. The farther away an observer sits, the deeper into our past they peer. In a sense, our present self is always hidden, wrapped in a cloak of time that no technology can pierce, visible to the distant universe only as a slowly arriving echo of who we used to be. The light leaving Earth tonight will not reach the farthest stars we can see for tens of thousands of years, and by then we may be something utterly transformed, or we may be gone. The cosmos does not see us, it sees our ghosts. Faced with all of this, the tangle of exposure and concealment, of risk and longing, humanity has not spoken with a single voice. Instead, we have split, almost naturally, into two impulses, two different ways of facing the silence, and they capture something deep about who we are. On one side stands the patient listener. There are those who believe that the wise course is simply to watch and to wait, to point our great dishes at the sky and search the incoming light for any trace of another mind, without ever revealing ourselves in return. This is the cautious path, the path of the careful hunter who keeps to the shadows. We listen, we record, we sift through endless streams of data, hoping to catch a single deliberate signal among the noise, like a neighbor quietly watching the street through a curtain. There is no risk in listening. A signal we merely receive cannot harm us. It can only teach us. And so for decades we have kept our ears open to the heavens, hoping, against the great silence, to hear someone else's voice. On the other side stands the one who would speak. There are those who believe that listening alone is not enough, that if we truly wish to know whether we are alone, we must be willing to call out, to send deliberate messages into the dark, and hope that someone, somewhere, is listening back. This is the bolder path, and it is not hard to admire the courage in it. To broadcast our presence is an act of openness, of trust, of faith that the universe might hold a friend rather than a predator. It says that we would rather risk the encounter than spend eternity hiding in the shadows of our own fear. And yet, if there is even a grain of truth in the dark forest, then every deliberate message we fling outward is a torch lit in a room that might be full of silent, watchful eyes. The same gesture can be read two ways, as the noblest reaching of a curious species, or as the single most reckless thing a young civilization could possibly do. We do not know which it is, and that not knowing is the whole problem. This split opens onto a question that is less about science and more about something older and harder, a question of who has the right to decide. When a small group of people aims a powerful transmitter at the stars and sends a message on behalf of the entire human species, they are making a choice for all of us, and for every generation that will come after. They are revealing the location of our home to whoever might be listening, and that revelation can never be taken back. Once a signal leaves us, it travels forever, beyond recall, beyond regret, a decision made permanent at the speed of light. And so a genuine and difficult debate has grown up around the idea: does anyone truly have the authority to speak for Earth? Should we be reaching out at all before we have asked ourselves, as a whole world, whether we want to be heard? There are no easy answers here, only the weight of a choice that, once made, belongs to everyone and can be unmade by no one. It is tempting, when we imagine these distant watchers, to picture them as monsters, cold and predatory, waiting to pounce the moment we reveal ourselves. But that fear may say more about us than about them. When we look up and dread what might be looking back, we are, in part, projecting our own history onto the stars. We know what happens when a powerful people arrives among a weaker one, because we have done it to ourselves, again and again. We carry the memory of conquest and the long shadow of all the times we reached a new shore and swept away whatever was there before us. So when we imagine an advanced civilization crossing the void to find us, we instinctively assume it will behave as we have behaved, that it will come to take, to dominate, to destroy. But perhaps that assumption is unfair, both to them and to the possibilities of what intelligence can become. Perhaps a civilization that has survived long enough to travel between the stars has, somewhere along the way, outgrown the very impulses we fear. Perhaps the will to conquer burns itself out before a species reaches that height, and those who endure are the ones who learned, long ago, that there are better things to do with a galaxy than plunder it. And there is something else worth remembering whenever the fear grows too loud, something easy to lose sight of in all this talk of hunters and danger. We are young, astonishingly, almost embarrassingly young. Our world has circled its star for billions of years, but the part of our story in which we could look up and understand what we were seeing spans barely a few thousand. The part in which we could send a signal at all spans only a single century. On the vast clock of the cosmos, we appeared a heartbeat ago. We are a civilization that has only just opened its eyes, blinking in the dark, calling out before we have learned how the forest works, or whether it is a forest at all. There is a kind of innocence in that, and a kind of loneliness too. We shout into the silence partly out of curiosity, but partly out of something more tender, a longing not to be alone, a wish to know that in all this immensity, there is someone else who looks up and wonders, someone who might, across the unimaginable distance, understand. It helps, too, to remember how small and fragile the thing we are protecting truly is. Our entire world, everything that has ever lived, every story ever told, every face you have ever loved, exists on a single pale blue speck, adrift in an ocean of black. The atmosphere that holds our biosignatures, the thin veil of air that betrays us to the stars, is also the delicate membrane that keeps us all alive, a layer so shallow that if the Earth were the size of an apple, it would be thinner than the skin. We are not a fortress. We are a soap bubble glowing in the dark, beautiful and precarious, kept aloft by forces we are only beginning to understand. And maybe that fragility is not a weakness to be hidden, but a wonder to be honored. A living world is a rare and precious thing, perhaps far rarer than all those countless planets would suggest. Whatever else is out there, the simple fact that life took hold here at all, that a cloud of stardust somehow arranged itself into creatures who could ask where they came from, is close to miraculous. It is worth guarding, but it may also be worth sharing. Let yourself imagine, for a moment, that the silence finally breaks. Imagine that one ordinary night, our instruments catch something they have never caught before, a signal that is too clean, too structured, too deliberate to be the work of any star, a pattern of pulses, perhaps, marching in the rhythm of prime numbers, unmistakable, undeniable. In that single instant, everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe would shatter and reform. We would no longer be alone. And then, perhaps, would come the harder message, the one that says, "We are coming, and we will arrive in 400 years." What would we do with such knowledge? 4 centuries is long enough for everything to change, long enough for the children of our children's children to become something we cannot imagine, to grow and learn and prepare for a meeting that none of us alive would ever see. We would have to decide, as a species, who we wanted to be when that day came. And the truest portrait of ourselves we could offer, the most honest answer to the question of who we are, might look a great deal like that golden record drifting through the dark, a small and hopeful gathering of our music, our voices, our wish to be known. To understand the full reach of our visibility, it helps to step back and see all our various signals as members of a single family. The light from our cities, the warmth that pours off our bodies and our machines, the radio waves carrying our music, the microwaves and the radar beams we send bouncing through the sky. All of these are the same fundamental thing wearing different faces. They are all electromagnetic radiation, all ripples traveling through the same medium at the same universal speed, differing only in their wavelength, in how tightly or loosely they are wound. Visible light is simply the narrow band our eyes happen to catch. Infrared is the part we feel as heat. Radio is the long, slow end of the spectrum, and the short, energetic end runs off into realms we cannot see at all. But it is all one continuum, one great family of light, and our world is pouring out signals across nearly the whole of it. We are not bright in just one color. We are bright everywhere, a beacon glowing across the entire spectrum. If only someone has the right eyes to look. Some of those signals carry farther and more sharply than others. Among the loudest, strangest things we have ever sent into the sky are our radar beams, the tight, powerful pulses we fire to map the heavens and track objects in orbit. Unlike the soft leakage of ordinary broadcasts, A radar beam is focused and intense, a concentrated spear of energy that can punch out into space far more cleanly than the diffuse murmur of our radio chatter. In a strange irony, some of our most detectable signals were never meant as messages at all. They were simply the byproducts of a species learning to watch its own neighborhood. And here lies one of the most curious wrinkles in the whole story. As our technology advances, we may actually be growing quieter, not louder. The early decades of broadcasting flung enormous amounts of energy wastefully into the air, much of it spilling uselessly into space. But newer technologies are tighter, more efficient, more contained, leaking far less into the cosmos. It is possible that our loudest era is already behind us, that the great expanding bubble of our earliest signals is the brightest we will ever be, and that a civilization following the same path would shine briefly and then fall quiet again, not from caution, but simply from getting better at what it does. And if we ever do go looking for others, we may not find them by their messages at all, but by their fingerprints, the unintended marks that any large civilization leaves on its surroundings. We call these techno-signatures, the telltale traces of technology rather than mere biology. A civilization might betray itself not by a deliberate signal, but by the strange chemistry of an industrialized atmosphere, by gases that no natural process would produce, the residue of machines and industry hanging in its air. Or, if we imagine truly vast ambitions, a civilization hungry for energy might begin to capture the light of its own star directly, building structures so enormous that they dim or reshape the starlight in ways we could detect from across the galaxy. We do not know if anything like that exists. We have looked here and there and found nothing yet. But the very idea reframes the search. We are not only listening for someone trying to talk to us, we are watching for the unintended shadow that any sufficiently busy civilization would cast upon its corner of the universe. The same kind of shadow we ourselves are casting, whether we mean to or not. There is a particular loneliness in the work of listening, decade after decade, to a sky that does not answer. Imagine the patience it takes, the quiet faith of pointing an instrument at the stars night after night, sifting through endless noise, chasing signal after signal that always turns out to be nothing, a passing satellite, a flicker of interference, the ordinary hum of an indifferent cosmos. And still we keep listening, because the alternative, to stop, to give up, to decide once and for all that the silence means we are alone, is somehow harder to bear than the waiting. There is something deeply human in that persistence, in the refusal to accept the emptiness as final. We are a species that cannot stop asking, even when the universe gives us no reply. And maybe that is its own kind of answer. Maybe the asking is part of what we are. The silence has led some to wonder about a darker possibility, one that goes by the name of the Great Filter. The idea is unsettlingly simple. Somewhere along the immense path from lifeless chemistry to a civilization that spreads among the stars, there may be a barrier, a step so difficult that almost nothing makes it through. Perhaps the filter lies behind us, in the staggering improbability of life beginning at all, or in some rare leap our ancestors managed that few others ever do, in which case we may be among the very few who made it this far. Or perhaps the filter lies ahead, a challenge that civilizations tend to meet just as they gain the power to destroy themselves, a hurdle we have not yet reached. We cannot know which it is, but there is a way to hold even this sobering thought without despair. If the hardest steps are behind us, then we are not a doomed accident, but a rare and improbable success, something precious that beat impossible odds. And if the challenges lie ahead, then they are not a sentence but a summons, an invitation to become wiser than our worst instincts, to prove that a young civilization can grow up without burning itself down. The silence does not have to be a warning of our doom. It can be a reminder of how much our survival matters, and how much rests on the choices we make now. So perhaps the wisest path is not to choose between listening and speaking, but to do both, carefully, to keep our ears open wide to the heavens, drinking in whatever the universe might offer, while reaching out only gently, thoughtfully, and with the full weight of the decision understood. To listen with both ears, and to speak, when we speak at all, with care. There is no formula that tells us the right balance, no equation that resolves the risk. There is only judgment, and humility, and the willingness to keep asking the question, rather than pretending we already know the answer. We are standing at the edge of the dark forest, with a torch in one hand and a finger to our lips, unsure whether to call out or stay silent. And that uncertainty is not a failure. It is simply the honest position of a species that has just begun to understand how large and strange its home truly is. Let yourself picture that expanding bubble of our signals one more time, but slowly, the way it truly is. At its outermost edge, more than 100 light-years from Earth, travel our very first faint broadcasts, the earliest murmurs of a world just learning to transmit, washing over distant stars that have no idea what they are receiving. A little closer in ride the signals of the decades that followed, our growing torrent of voices and images, each shell of broadcast nested inside the next like the rings of a tree, a frozen record of our entire electronic history, written in expanding spheres of light. The oldest signals are the farthest out, the newest still close to home, and all of them are racing outward together, an ever-widening announcement of our presence that we could not stop now, even if we wanted to. Somewhere out there, a star is just now being touched by the light of our earliest broadcasts, while another, nearer one, is receiving signals from a more recent year. We are not a single shout. We are a continuous, expanding chorus, the sound of a civilization waking up, spreading across the galaxy at the speed of light. It is worth remembering how recently all of this began, how short the road has been, from looking up to reaching out. For almost the entire span of human existence, the night sky was simply a mystery, a scattering of lights that we wove into stories and gods and the shapes of the things we feared and loved. We watched those lights with nothing but our own eyes for countless generations, charting their slow wheel across the heavens, guessing at their nature, never imagining what they truly were. Then, only a few centuries ago, we built the first crude instruments to gather more light than our eyes could hold, and the sky cracked open. We saw mountains on the moon, the moons of other worlds, the vast architecture of our own galaxy. We learned to catch light our eyes could not see, to listen to the radio whispers of distant objects, to read the chemistry of stars in the colors of their glow. And then, in a blink, we learned not just to listen, but to speak. The leap from naked-eye wonder to interstellar broadcasting happened so fast, in so few generations, that we have barely had time to consider what it means. We became a species that could call out to the stars before we had any idea who might be out there to answer. When you set that against the depth of cosmic time, the sheer improbability of our existence becomes almost overwhelming. Think of everything that had to happen for you to be here, asking these questions. A star had to live and die to forge the atoms in your body. A world had to form at just the right distance, with just the right ingredients, and hold on to its water and its air for billions of years. Life had to begin, somehow, in that ancient chemistry, and then survive every catastrophe the planet threw at it, every freeze and impact and upheaval, clinging on and adapting, and slowly, patiently complexifying across an almost unthinkable stretch of time. And then, at the very end of that long chain, a creature had to emerge that could not only live but look back, that could trace the whole story and stand in awe of it. You are the universe's way of contemplating itself, the product of a chain of fortunate moments, so long and so unlikely that its mere existence is a kind of wonder. Whatever else the dark forest holds, the fact that we are here at all to worry about it is something close to a miracle. And this is why the question of whether we are alone matters so much, far beyond idle curiosity. There is a profound difference between two possible universes, and we do not yet know which one we inhabit. In one, life is a fluke, a single spark struck once against impossible odds, and we are the only minds in all that immensity, the lone keepers of meaning in a cosmos that would be utterly empty without us. In the other, life is everywhere, the natural flowering of a universe inclined toward it, and the galaxy is quietly teeming with worlds where something stirs and grows and perhaps even wonders. Both possibilities are staggering in their own way. To be alone would mean that everything we are, every thought and feeling and act of kindness, is unspeakably rare, a flame we are obliged to protect because there is no other. To be one among many would mean that we belong to a vast and living cosmos, that we are part of something far greater than ourselves. Even the most modest discovery, a single trace of microbial life clinging to another world, would transform our understanding of everything. It would tell us that life is not a one-time accident, but a story the universe tells again and again, wherever it gets the chance. When you gather all these threads together, a strange and layered portrait of our world emerges. To a distant observer with patience and the right instruments, the Earth would reveal itself in stages, like a secret slowly told. First, they would see a planet, a small dark world crossing a star. Then they would notice it sits in the habitable zone, in the gentle band where water can flow. Then, reading its air, they would find the chemistry of life, the impossible balance of gases that only biology can sustain. Then, perhaps, the glow of its night side and the warmth of its industry would whisper of something more than mere life, of minds and machines. And finally, riding the faint signals leaking from its surface, they would hear the unmistakable mark of a civilization, a young one, loud and curious and utterly unaware of who might be listening. Each layer is a deeper revelation, and each one is harder to hide than the last. And here is the cruel paradox at the very center of it all. To truly conceal ourselves, to scrub away every trace, we would have to erase the very thing that makes us worth concealing. We would have to hide our light, our warmth, our air, our life itself. To disappear completely, we would have to stop being alive. So maybe the dark forest, for all its cold logic, asks the wrong question. Maybe the real choice before us is not how to hide, but how to grow. Instead of pouring our ingenuity into vanishing, into making ourselves smaller and quieter and more afraid, we could turn that same effort toward becoming the kind of civilization worth meeting. We could focus not on erasing our presence, but on deserving it, on learning to be wise enough, generous enough, and durable enough that an encounter with us would be something other than a threat. There is, after all, a deep and ancient impulse in us that runs against all our caution, the urge to leave a mark, to be remembered, to reach out across the dark and say, "We were here, and we mattered." We carved our images on cave walls before we had written language. We sent our names and our music into the void on golden discs. We cannot help but want to be known, and perhaps that longing, foolish as it might be in a dangerous universe, is also one of the most beautiful things about us. Through all of this, one truth keeps returning, quiet and humbling. We know almost nothing. For all our telescopes and equations, for all our clever theories about hunters and forests and silent predators, the plain fact is that we have never met another mind from beyond our world, never caught a single confirmed whisper, never had even one example to learn from. Everything we say about extraterrestrial life is, in the end, an educated guess shaped by the only example we have, which is ourselves. We imagine alien civilizations as fearful or aggressive because we know what fear and aggression look like in our own history. But the universe is under no obligation to resemble us. A civilization born under a different star, shaped by a different history, might think in ways we cannot begin to picture, might value things we would never value, might have left our small dramas of conquest and survival far behind. The dark forest assumes that everyone reasons as a frightened survivor would. But perhaps some minds have found their way to something gentler, and perhaps the silence hides not a battlefield, but a kind of patience we are simply too young to understand. And if the universe is kind, or even just indifferent rather than hostile, then to hide would be to throw away the greatest opportunity our species could ever have. Imagine what we might learn from a single conversation with a civilization older and wiser than our own. Imagine the questions they might answer, the perspectives they might offer, the chance to see ourselves at last, through eyes that are not human. Every problem that torments us, every mystery we cannot solve, every wound in our history might look different in the light of another mind's experience. To meet another civilization could be the most transformative event in all of human history, a door opening onto possibilities we cannot even name. And yet we cannot know in advance whether that door opens onto a teacher or a threat. That is the agony of it. The same act that might save us could also expose us, and there is no way, from where we stand, to be sure which it would be. Once we speak, we cannot unspeak. Once the signal leaves, it travels forever. This is why two voices will always live inside us when we face the stars, and why neither of them is wrong. One voice is the cautious one, the ancient survivor that whispers to stay quiet, to stay small, to remember how dangerous it can be to stand out in a world you do not understand. It is the voice that kept our ancestors alive in real forests, full of real dangers, and it deserves to be heard. The other voice is the curious one, the explorer that cannot bear not to know, that looks at the silence and refuses to accept it, that would rather risk everything for the chance of contact than spend forever wondering. It is the voice that drove us out of our caves, across our oceans, and finally off our planet entirely. Both voices are part of what makes us human. The wisdom we are still struggling to find is not in silencing either one, but in knowing when to listen to each, in holding caution and courage together, without letting either one rule us completely. It is worth letting your imagination wander, just for a while, through the question of who these others might actually be, if they exist at all. Perhaps they are explorers, driven by the same restless curiosity that drives us, crossing the dark not to conquer, but simply to see, to know, to add another world to their long catalogue of wonders. To such travelers, we would be a discovery, a marvel, a living world to be studied with care, and maybe even protected. Perhaps they are scholars, ancient and patient, content to observe from a distance, watching young civilizations rise and fall, the way we might watch a tide pool, teeming with life, fascinated, but unwilling to disturb. Perhaps they are something stranger still, so utterly alien in their thinking that words like friendly and hostile simply do not apply, beings whose purposes we could no more comprehend than an ant comprehends a passing city. Or perhaps, yes, perhaps they are exactly what the dark forest fears, silent hunters who long ago decided that the only safe stranger is one that has been removed from the game. We cannot know, and that not knowing is precisely what makes the question so endlessly compelling. There is an old image that captures our situation perfectly. We are like someone standing before a door we have only just discovered, a door that has been there all along, waiting at the edge of everything we know. On the other side might be a teacher, a friend, a whole community of minds eager to welcome us. Or on the other side might be something we would be far safer never to have met. We do not know what waits there, and we cannot see through the door. All we can do is decide whether to knock, and that decision carries the weight of our entire future. But here is the thing about that door, the thing that makes us who we are. We are a species that has never, in all our history, been able to leave a door unopened. We have always knocked. We have always crossed the threshold, sailed past the horizon, climbed the mountain, simply because it was there. The question is not really whether we will eventually reach for that cosmic door. The question is whether we will reach for it wisely, and what kind of people we will be when it finally opens. It is important, though, to draw a careful distinction, one that often gets lost when we talk about all of this. There is a real difference between the signals we leak and the signals we choose to send. Our leakage, the faint radio glow spilling unintentionally from our daily life, is weak and diffuse, and growing weaker as our technology improves. It is the background murmur of a living world, hard to catch, and harder still to decipher across the great distances. But a deliberate beacon, a focused and powerful signal aimed intentionally at the stars, is something else entirely. It is a shout where the leakage is a whisper, a flare fired into the night where the leakage is the dim glow of a distant campfire. And it is precisely the deliberate beacons, not the accidental leakage, that have become the heart of the controversy. In recent years, as some have proposed sending ever more powerful and deliberate messages, a serious disagreement has grown among thoughtful people who study these questions, a debate not about whether we can be heard, but about whether we should make ourselves easier to find. On one side of that debate stand those who argue that the risk, however small, is simply too grave to ignore. They point out that we cannot estimate the danger because we have no idea what is out there, and that when you cannot estimate a risk and the worst case is catastrophic, the wise course is restraint. They argue that no small group, however well-meaning, should be deliberately broadcasting the location of all humanity without the consent of the world, and that a choice this momentous and this irreversible ought to belong to everyone, made slowly and carefully, not rushed by the enthusiasm of a few. On the other side stand those who believe the fear is overblown, that any civilization capable of crossing interstellar distances could already detect us easily if it wished, that our leakage has been spreading for a century regardless, and that hiding now would be both futile and cowardly. They argue that the potential reward of contact is so vast, and the dark forest so unproven, that to muzzle ourselves out of fear would be to betray the very curiosity that makes us human. Both sides are sincere. Both are made up of careful, intelligent people. And the fact that they cannot agree tells you just how genuinely uncertain this whole question remains. Beneath the technical arguments lies something deeper, a question about consent and responsibility that we have never before had to face on this scale. Every previous decision in human history, however large, affected only a portion of us, or a single generation, or a single corner of the world. But a message sent to the stars is different. It is made on behalf of every person alive, and every person yet to be born, and it cannot be recalled once it is gone. No vote was taken, no species-wide conversation was held, and so we are left to wonder whether it is even possible to make such a choice rightly, whether there could ever be a way for a whole world to decide together what it wishes to say to the cosmos, or whether the decision will simply be made, as so many are, by whoever happens to hold the transmitter. These are not questions science alone can answer. They are questions about who we want to be, about how a young civilization learns to act with wisdom when the stakes stretch beyond anything it has ever known. When you lay all of these thoughts side by side, the fear and the longing, the caution and the courage, the cold logic of the hunter and the warm hope of the explorer, a kind of hard-won wisdom begins to take shape. It is not the wisdom of a final answer, because there is no final answer to be had, not yet. It is the wisdom of holding the question well, of refusing both the false comfort of certainty and the paralysis of fear. We may never know, in our lifetimes, whether the forest is dark or whether it is simply empty, but we can decide how to carry ourselves in the face of that uncertainty. We can choose to be careful without being cowardly, curious without being reckless, humble without being hopeless. And whatever we decide about speaking and listening, about hiding and revealing, one thing seems certain: our curiosity will not be extinguished. We will keep looking up. We will keep asking. It is simply not in us to stop. To feel the full force of the dark forest's logic, it helps to follow what happens after two civilizations become aware of each other, in the chain of reasoning that gives the idea its teeth. Suppose you detect another world, and they detect you. You might think the natural thing would be to communicate, to send a message saying we mean no harm, let us be friends. But across the immense gulfs of space and time, that message changes nothing, because the other side faces exactly the same problem you do. They cannot know whether your friendly greeting is sincere or a clever deception meant to lull them, and they know that you cannot know whether their reply is sincere either. Each side knows that the other knows this. Each side knows that the other is weighing the same terrible arithmetic, and in that hall of mirrors, where trust can never be verified and the cost of being wrong is annihilation, the cold logic keeps circling back to the same grim conclusion. The longer the chain of suspicion runs, the more it seems to favor the one who acts first and asks nothing. This is what makes the dark forest so chilling. It does not require anyone to be evil. It only requires everyone to be afraid and unable to prove they are not. And yet, the moment you state the logic plainly, you can also begin to see its cracks, the places where it might not hold. The dark forest assumes that destroying a stranger is cheap and easy, that you can eliminate a distant world at no real cost to yourself. But across interstellar distances, nothing is cheap or easy. It assumes that every civilization values its own survival above all else, and reasons in the same icy, self-interested way. But that is a guess about minds we have never met. It assumes that the universe is a place of scarcity, where worlds must compete for limited resources. But the cosmos is almost unimaginably vast and rich, and a civilization advanced enough to threaten others might also be advanced enough to need nothing they possess. The logic of the dark forest is airtight, only if you accept all its assumptions, and every one of those assumptions is a question mark. That is the strange thing about it. It is at once deeply compelling and entirely unproven. A story that feels true, precisely because it mirrors our own fears, which is the very reason we should be careful before believing it. There is also a subtler obstacle to any meeting, one that has nothing to do with hostility and everything to do with time. For two civilizations ever to find each other, they must not only be close enough in space, they must also overlap in time, and that overlap is far harder to achieve than it sounds. A civilization that broadcasts for a few centuries and then falls silent, whether by choice or by catastrophe, or simply by growing into something quieter, occupies only the briefest flicker in the long life of its star. For us to catch its signal, our flicker and its flicker would have to align, two brief candles, lit at just the right moments, across billions of years of darkness. Imagine two people wandering a vast, lightless plain, each holding a lantern that they light for only a single second at some random point in a century. The chance that they happen to light their lanterns at the same instant, while also standing close enough to see each other's glow, is vanishingly small. It may be that the galaxy has been home to many civilizations, rising and fading like sparks, and yet hardly any of them ever overlapped long enough to meet. The silence, then, might not be a sign of danger or of absence, but simply of the cruel mismatch of cosmic timing. Let yourself stand, for a moment, in the place of that distant astronomer, the one who might one day turn their instruments toward our corner of the sky. They would not see us as we see ourselves. They would not see our faces, or our cities, or our wars. They would see a point of light beside a star, a faint and steady presence that night after night dims that star by the smallest sliver as our world crosses in front of it. They would gather that starlight patiently, year upon year, splitting it into its colors, and slowly a picture would emerge. Water, oxygen in strange abundance, a whisper of methane that should not be there, a night side that glows where no natural world should glow, a faint heat that lingers beyond what sunlight alone could explain. And threaded through it all, riding the light, the unmistakable artificial murmur of a civilization. Piece by piece, they would assemble the portrait of a living, breathing, thinking world, and at some point, they would have to make a choice about what to do with that knowledge. We do not know what they would choose, but we know that we, in their place, would feel the same vertigo, the same mixture of wonder and caution, the same dawning realization that we were no longer alone. And what, in the end, would they make of the message we tried to send, that golden portrait drifting through the dark? We chose its contents with extraordinary care, knowing it might be the only thing of us a stranger would ever encounter. We did not send our weapons or our conquests. We sent our music, the sound of our voices speaking gentle greetings, the laughter of children, the songs of the creatures we share our world with, the rush of rain and the roll of thunder. We tried to capture not what we fear about ourselves, but what we hope is best in us, the curiosity, the tenderness, the wish to connect. Whether any of it could be understood by a mind shaped on another world is impossible to say, but the choice of what to include was itself a kind of self-portrait, a declaration of who we wish to be. Faced with the chance to introduce ourselves to the universe, we reached not for fear, but for beauty. That instinct, more than any signal or any cloak, may be the truest thing about us, and the thing most worth letting the cosmos see. It is worth sitting, too, with the sheer responsibility that all of this places upon us, a responsibility that stretches far beyond our own brief lives. The signals we send today will outlive us by thousands of years. The choices we make now about whether to broadcast and what to say will reach their destinations long after everyone who made them has turned to dust. We are, in a very real sense, making decisions on behalf of descendants we will never meet, casting our voices toward a future we cannot imagine. This is a strange and weighty kind of stewardship, the duty to act wisely not for ourselves, but for a humanity that does not yet exist, and it asks something of us that we are only beginning to learn, the ability to think across spans of time far longer than a single human life, to weigh consequences that will ripen centuries after we are gone. The cosmos teaches patience. It teaches us that our actions echo far beyond our own horizon, and that to send a message to the stars is to accept responsibility for an echo that will outlast our entire civilization. Consider, as well, how the search itself has quietly changed us, even without a single answer. In looking for others, we have been forced to look closely at ourselves, to ask what exactly makes a world appear alive, what marks a civilization leaves, what signature our own existence writes across the dark. To know what to listen for, we had to understand ourselves as the universe might perceive us, and in doing so we saw our planet from the outside, as a single fragile thing, rather than the boundless stage of all our dramas. The search for life beyond Earth has a way of folding back on the searcher, reminding us that we are not separate from the cosmos we study, but a part of it, made of the same atoms, bound by the same laws, subject to the same long silence. Even if we never find anyone, the searching has already given us a gift, a deeper and humbler sense of where we stand. We have learned to see our home the way a stranger might, and that vision changes how we hold it. And there is a unity in that vision that is easy to overlook. When you look up and wonder whether we are alone, the old divisions that consume so much of our daily life begin to shrink. From the vantage of the stars, there are no borders on the earth, no separate nations, no quarrels that would mean anything at all to a watcher light years away. There is only the planet, whole and singular, a single point of blue carrying every human being who has ever lived. The question of contact, of how we would meet another civilization, is one of the few questions that genuinely belongs to all of us at once, that cannot be answered by any single group on behalf of the rest. In that sense, the dark forest and the great silence do something unexpected. They invite us to think of ourselves not as scattered tribes but as one young species, sharing one small world, facing one vast and uncertain cosmos together. Perhaps before we are ready to speak to anyone out there, we must first learn to speak, truly and wisely, with one another. There is a quiet beauty, too, in the simple act of keeping watch. Somewhere right now, instruments are listening, turning patiently toward the sky, gathering the faint light of distant stars, in the hope of catching something no one has ever caught. It is a strangely hopeful thing to do, this listening, a refusal to assume the worst, a willingness to keep the door of possibility open, even after generations of silence. Every night that passes without an answer is not a defeat, but a continuation of one of the most patient and noble projects our species has ever undertaken, the effort to know whether we are alone. And whether the answer comes tomorrow, or in 1,000 years, or never, the listening itself says something fine about us. It says that we have not given up on the idea that there might be others, that we still believe the universe could hold a friend, that we would rather keep watch in hope than close our eyes in fear. In a cosmos that so often seems cold and indifferent, that hope is a small, warm light of its own. Let yourself imagine the slower, stranger version of contact, not a sudden invasion out of the sky, but a signal that arrives, and a wait that stretches across generations. Suppose we did receive that message, the one that says they are coming, and the journey will take centuries. What would those centuries be like? The people who first caught the signal would grow old and die without ever seeing the meeting. They would pass the knowledge to their children, and their children to theirs, an unbroken chain of preparation across hundreds of years. Whole philosophies would rise around the coming encounter. Some would prepare with hope, others with dread. Entire ways of thinking, of governing, of imagining ourselves would be shaped by the knowledge that we were no longer alone and that the others were on their way. It would be the longest anticipation in human history, a slow and deliberate readying for the most important moment our species had ever faced. And in all that time, we would have the chance to decide, carefully and together, who we wished to be when the visitors finally arrived. Perhaps that is the gift hidden inside the terror, the gift of time, the chance to become worthy of the meeting before it ever comes. There is a thought that turns the whole dilemma gently on its head. Perhaps our loudness, the very thing the dark forest warns against, is itself a sign of our youth and our innocence, rather than our foolishness. A civilization that has lived a long time, that has weathered its dangerous adolescence and learned the shape of the cosmos, might naturally grow quieter, not out of fear, but out of wisdom and efficiency, its signals tightening into whispers as its technology matures. We are loud because we are new, because we have only just learned to shout and have not yet learned when to be still. And if that is true, then the silence of the universe might be the silence of the grown, the calm of civilizations that long ago passed through the noisy phase we are living in now. To listen to that silence is, in a way, to listen to maturity, to the quiet of those who have already learned the lessons we are only beginning to confront. There is something almost reassuring in that reading. It suggests that the silence is not a graveyard, but a kind of patience, the stillness of elders, waiting to see whether the young will survive their own loud beginning. Whatever the truth turns out to be, we should be honest that we cannot truly hide, and perhaps we should make our peace with that. We can dim certain signals, we can blur certain trails, we can become, with great effort, a little more discreet, but to erase a living world entirely, to scrub away every shadow and every glow and every breath of an atmosphere shaped by life, is almost certainly beyond us, and may be beyond anyone. A world that holds life leaves too many fingerprints, scattered across too many kinds of light, for any cloak to cover them all. And if a civilization out there is patient enough, curious enough, and equipped with methods we have not even dreamed of, it will likely find us no matter what we do. We cannot control whether we are seen. We can only control what there is to see. If we set aside the fear for a moment and let ourselves simply wonder, the search for other minds becomes one of the most thrilling adventures we could ever undertake. Think of what it would mean to learn that the spark which lit on Earth lit elsewhere too, that the long climb from simple chemistry to consciousness is not a freak accident, but a path the universe knows how to walk. Every world we study, every atmosphere we read, every faint signal we chase, is a step into a mystery that touches the deepest question a thinking creature can ask. Are we the only ones who look up, or is the night sky filled with other watchers, other wanderers, other small, fragile civilizations, gazing back across the same dark and asking the same thing about us? We do not know, but the not knowing is not a frustration. It is an invitation. It is the open frontier of our age, the great unanswered question that calls to anyone who has ever stood beneath the stars and felt that strange mixture of smallness and longing. To search for life beyond our world is to take that feeling seriously, to turn that ancient wonder into patient, careful work, and to keep faith that the answer, whatever it is worth the seeking. And here is perhaps the most humbling truth of all. Whether the universe is crowded or empty, whether the forest is full of hunters or simply silent and bare, our task is the same. We must learn to live wisely on the one world we have, to care for the fragile thing we are, and to grow into a civilization mature enough to face whatever the cosmos holds. The dark forest, in the end, is less a map of the universe than a mirror held up to ourselves. It shows us our fears, our history, our capacity for both suspicion and hope. And the lesson it teaches, if it teaches anything, is not that we should hide, but that we should become better, wiser, and more worthy of the immense and mysterious place we find ourselves in. The stars are not going anywhere. The question of whether we are alone will wait for us, patient as the night. What matters is who we are becoming as we ask it, and whether we can hold both our caution and our wonder without letting either one consume us. So we keep watching, we keep listening, we keep wondering whether the next signal, the next faint dip in a distant star's light, the next strange whisper caught by some patient instrument, will be the one that changes everything. And we keep wrestling, honestly and without easy answers, with the question of whether to call out in return. There is no resolution to offer, no neat conclusion that ties up the mystery. There is only the open sky and our small, brave, curious species standing beneath it, torn between the urge to hide and the urge to be known, between the fear of the dark forest and the hope that it might, after all, be a place of friends. That tension is not a problem to be solved. It is simply what it means to be young and aware in a universe far older and larger than ourselves, to stand at the very beginning of a story whose ending no one alive will ever read. There is something poignant in realizing that the expanding shell of our signals is also a kind of autobiography, a century of human history frozen into light and racing outward forever. The very first faint transmissions carried the world as it was generations ago, a world that no longer exists, its voices long since fallen silent here on Earth, yet still traveling on out there, preserved in the dark. As that bubble grew, it captured everything, the triumphs and the tragedies, the music and the noise, the whole churning story of a species learning to use its new voice. In a strange way, nothing we have ever broadcast is truly gone. It is all still out there, layered in expanding spheres, a complete and unedited record of who we have been, written in a language of light that we cannot recall and cannot revise. If anyone ever does intercept it, they will not meet the us of today. They will meet every version of us at once, the whole long arc of our recent history arriving star by star, year by year, a portrait painted not as we wish to be seen, but exactly as we were. There is an honesty in that, which no carefully crafted golden record could ever match. The work of actually searching the sky for another voice is far less dramatic than the imagination would have it, and far more beautiful for that. It is mostly patience, the slow and unglamorous labor of sifting through oceans of data, examining signal after signal, ruling out the ordinary explanations one by one. Nearly every candidate turns out to be something mundane: a satellite passing overhead, a flicker of earthly interference, a glitch in the instruments, the simple noise of a busy world and a busy cosmos. Now and then, very rarely, something appears that cannot be immediately explained, a signal strange enough to quicken the pulse, to make a researcher lean closer and wonder, just for a moment, if this might be the one. And then, almost always, the ordinary explanation arrives, and the wonder settles back into patient waiting. But that fleeting moment, that catch of breath when the universe seems about to answer, is what keeps the work alive. It is the hope that somewhere, in all that noise, there might be a single deliberate note, a voice that is not our own, waiting to be found by anyone patient enough to keep listening. And if we ever did decide to speak, truly and deliberately, what would we even say? How do you write a letter to a mind you have never met, shaped by a world you cannot imagine, that shares not a single word of any human language? This is a puzzle of its own, and the answers we have reached for are revealing. We turn, again and again, to mathematics, to the patterns we believe any thinking creature anywhere would recognize, the sequence of prime numbers, the simple relationships of geometry, the structure of the elements that make up everything, everywhere. We reach for the one language we suspect is truly universal, the language of number and pattern that the cosmos itself seems to be written in. From there we try to build outward, to sketch our chemistry, our world, our forms, ourselves. It is a humbling exercise, this attempt to introduce a whole species in a handful of symbols that a stranger might understand. And whether or not anyone is ever there to read it, the very act of composing such a message forces us to ask what is essential about us, what we would most want a stranger to know, what, stripped of everything particular and local, we truly are. Beneath all our reasoning about risk and detection, there is an emotional truth that the cold logic tends to skip over. We are lonely, not in the small, personal sense, but in a vast and species-wide one. For all of recorded history, we have looked up and wondered whether anyone was looking back, and the silence has answered us every time. We have populated the heavens with gods and spirits and imagined companions precisely because the thought of being utterly alone is so hard to bear. The search for other civilizations is, at its heart, an expression of that ancient longing, the wish not to be the only candle burning in an infinite dark. And this is why the dark forest is so uniquely troubling, because it suggests that the very thing we long for, contact, connection, the knowledge that we are not alone, might be the thing that destroys us. It takes our deepest hope and turns it into our greatest danger. But notice too that even the possibility of others, even the unproven chance that the universe holds another mind, is enough to comfort us, to make the dark feel a little less empty. We do not need to have found them yet. The mere possibility is a kind of companionship, a reason to keep looking up. It is worth holding on to a sense of proportion, too, against the fear that the dark forest can stir. The hypothesis is dramatic, and drama has a way of feeling true. But for all its elegance, the dark forest remains one possible story among many, and not even the most likely one. The universe has not shown us hunters. It has shown us only silence. And silence can mean a great many things. It can mean that life is rare. It can mean that minds are rarer. It can mean that the distances and the timings simply do not line up. It can mean that everyone is listening and no one is brave enough to speak. Or it can mean nothing at all yet, because we have been searching for only a few decades, with instruments that can sample only the tiniest fraction of the sky and the spectrum, looking for a needle in a haystack the size of the galaxy. We should be careful not to mistake the early emptiness of our search for a verdict about the universe. We have barely begun to look. To declare the forest dark on the strength of so little evidence would be like dipping a cup into the ocean, finding it empty of fish, and concluding the sea is lifeless. Whatever the truth, the simple fact of asking these questions places us at a remarkable moment in our story. We are the first generation in the entire history of our species with the tools to actually search, to actually listen, to actually reach out. For all the countless humans who came before us and could only gaze at the stars and wonder, we are the ones who get to begin turning that wonder into knowledge. That is an extraordinary privilege and an extraordinary responsibility. The answers may not come in our lifetimes. The great question of whether we are alone may remain open for centuries more, but we are the ones who get to ask it properly, to lay the groundwork, to take the first real steps into a mystery that has haunted every human heart since the first of us looked up. We stand at the threshold of one of the greatest adventures imaginable, and however it unfolds, however long it takes, we have the privilege of being here, awake and aware, at the very beginning of the search. Take a moment to truly feel how thin the margin is that holds all of this together. The life that betrays us to the stars, the breathing biosphere that paints our atmosphere with the colors of biology, is also the most extraordinary achievement we know of anywhere in the universe. It took nearly 4 billion years to build, an almost unbroken chain of living things stretching back to the first faint stirrings in some ancient sea, each generation handing on the spark to the next, across a span of time so vast it defeats the imagination. Every creature that has ever lived, every leaf and feather and beating heart, is a link in that chain, and it all rests on a world that is, by cosmic standards, almost unbearably delicate, shielded by a wisp of atmosphere, warmed by a star that will not last forever, vulnerable to 100 catastrophes we are only beginning to understand. When we talk about hiding the Earth, we are talking about concealing the single most precious thing we have ever encountered, the one place where the universe is known, for certain, to have woken up and looked at itself. Perhaps the better instinct is not to hide such a thing, but to cherish it, to protect it from the dangers we already know are real, and to carry it forward with the care it deserves. In the end, the question of whether to reveal ourselves comes down to a question of character, of who we choose to be in the face of the unknown. We could choose fear, and spend our energy shrinking, hiding, treating every silence as a threat, and every possibility as a danger. Or we could choose something braver and harder, to face the uncertainty with our eyes open, to prepare wisely without surrendering to dread, to remain curious and hopeful even knowing the risks. Neither choice guarantees our safety, because nothing does. But one of them keeps us small, and the other lets us grow. And if a distant civilization ever does find us, after all our worrying about how to hide, perhaps the thing that matters most is not whether we manage to conceal our light, but what kind of light we turned out to be. Whether they find a species defined by fear and aggression, terrified and terrifying in equal measure, or a small and fragile civilization that, against all odds, kept reaching upward, kept trying to understand, kept hoping to meet a friend. We cannot control whether we are seen, but we can decide what there is to find. That, in the end, may be the real answer the dark forest demands of us. Not a clever cloak, not a perfect silence, not a desperate scramble to vanish from the sky, but a quiet resolve to become worthy of being found, to live in such a way that an encounter with us would enrich the universe rather than endanger it. We may never know whether the forest is dark. We may spend 1,000 more years in the silence, listening and wondering, and reaching out with care. But however long it takes, the work in front of us is clear enough. To understand our world more deeply, to treat each other and our fragile home with the wisdom the cosmos seems to ask of us, and to keep our eyes lifted to the stars, not only in fear of what might be hunting there, but in hope of what might be waiting, patient and curious, on the other side of all that beautiful, terrifying dark. It is worth pausing on a gentle irony that runs through this whole story. The same cleverness that lets us imagine cloaking an entire planet, that lets us calculate the precise power of a laser to erase our own shadow, is the very cleverness that makes us detectable in the first place. Our intelligence is both the thing that exposes us and the thing that might one day hide us, the source of our danger and the source of any protection we could devise. There is no escaping that we are a technological species now, that we have crossed a threshold and cannot go back to the quiet of a world without machines. The genie of our own ingenuity is out, and it casts a long shadow across the sky. But that same ingenuity is also what allows us to ask these questions at all, to imagine the watchers, to weigh the risks, to dream of becoming wiser. We cannot uninvent ourselves. We can only decide how to use what we have become. And perhaps the measure of a civilization is not whether it can hide its power, but whether it can learn to wield that power with humility, restraint, and care before its reach exceeds its wisdom. There is a strange comfort, too, in the sheer ordinariness of our world against the backdrop of the cosmos. We orbit a perfectly average star, one of hundreds of billions in our galaxy alone, itself one of hundreds of billions of galaxies. There is nothing about our location that marks us as special, no cosmic spotlight pointed at our door. We are tucked away in a quiet outer arm of an unremarkable galaxy, a small world around an ordinary sun in a vast and crowded sky. To find us, a hunter would have to single us out from an almost endless multitude of stars, to look in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, with exactly the right instruments, and to care enough to act. The very anonymity of our address is a kind of shelter. In an ocean of countless suns, the odds of any particular predator fixing its attention on our one faint point of light, in the brief window of our loudness, are not nearly as dire as our fears would have us believe. We are not standing in a spotlight on an empty stage. We are one small voice in an immense and noisy crowd, and the crowd itself helps hide us. So where does all of this leave us, standing at the edge of the cosmic forest with our questions and our fears and our stubborn, irrepressible hope? It leaves us, I think, exactly where we have always been, which is at the beginning. We do not have the answers. We do not know if anyone is out there, or whether they are friends or hunters or something we cannot imagine. We do not know whether our century of broadcasting was a harmless gesture or a fateful mistake. We know only that we are here, awake and curious, on a small blue world, asking the oldest question there is. And we know that we cannot stop asking it, that something in us will always lean toward the light, always strain to hear a voice in the silence, always wonder what lies beyond the next horizon. That restlessness has carried us a very long way already. It may yet carry us further than we can dream. And whatever waits for us out there in the dark, the asking itself, the looking up, the refusal to accept that we are alone, is one of the finest and most human things we will ever do. There is one last thought worth carrying with you, and it has to do with how this question binds us to everyone who came before. When you stand beneath the night sky and wonder whether anyone is out there, you are joining a conversation older than every nation, older than every language, older than memory itself. The first humans who ever looked up felt the same pull you feel now, the same mixture of awe and longing and unease before that scattering of distant lights. They had no telescopes, no radios, no understanding of what the stars truly were, and yet they asked the same question, in their own way, around their own small fires. Every generation since has inherited that question and passed it on, unanswered, down through thousands of years, until it reached us. And now, for the first time, we are the generation that can do more than wonder. We can listen, we can search, we can even, if we choose, reply. We are the inheritors of humanity's oldest question, holding it at the precise moment when it is finally becoming something we might answer. That is a sacred kind of trust, and how we carry it matters. We owe it to all those who wondered before us, and to all those who will wonder after, to ask it well, to ask it bravely, and to ask it with the care that such a question deserves. And whatever we eventually discover, the question will keep doing what it has always done. It will humble us, and it will lift us. It will remind us, on our worst days, that our quarrels are small against the backdrop of the stars, and on our best days, that we are capable of wonder vast enough to hold the whole cosmos in a single thought. It will pull us out of ourselves and set us, for a moment, in our true place, as one small and curious species, on one small and precious world, gazing out at an immensity we are only beginning to comprehend. That is the gift hidden inside the fear, the thing the dark forest can never take from us, the simple, stubborn, beautiful act of looking up. Let us return at the very end to that dark forest where we began, and to the small figure standing alone within it. For most of our history, we were that figure in the truest sense, surrounded by a darkness we could not pierce, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, unsure whether anything moved between the distant trees. We held our breath, we stayed small, we watched the night sky with longing and with fear, and we kept our silence, because we had no other choice. But something changed, just over a century ago, in the span of a single human lifetime. We did the one thing the careful creature in the forest is never supposed to do. We lit a fire. We learned to make light and sound and signals of our own, and almost without realizing it, we sent them blazing out into the dark in every direction at once. That fire is still burning. It has been burning for 100 years, and its glow is racing outward even now, washing over star after star, and there is no way to put it out. The light we have already released can never be called back. It belongs to the universe now. And so the question is no longer whether to light the fire, because the fire is lit. The question is how we choose to sit beside it. We can sit in terror, shrinking from every shadow, convinced that the darkness is full of hunters waiting to fall upon us, spending our days trying to smother the flame we can never fully extinguish. Or we can sit beside that fire with a different spirit, alert but not paralyzed, cautious but not consumed by fear, tending our small light with care while we learn, slowly and patiently, to read the forest around us. We can keep our eyes open and our ears open, ready for whatever the dark may hold, while still allowing ourselves to hope that somewhere out there, drawn by the same warmth, another small fire might be burning, tended by hands as curious and as uncertain as our own. No one can tell us which of those two ways of sitting by the fire is correct. That choice is ours, and it will say more about who we are than any signal we ever send. Because in the end, that fire is more than a danger, and more than a beacon. It is the light of a universe beginning, through us, to become aware of itself. For nearly 14 billion years, the cosmos expanded and cooled, and forged its galaxies and stars in silence, with no one to witness the grandeur of it, no eye to see, and no mind to marvel. And then, on one small world among uncountable others, atoms arranged themselves into creatures who could look up, and wonder, and ask. We are the part of the universe that has woken up. When we listen to the stars, the cosmos is listening to itself. When we reach out into the dark, it is the dark reaching back toward its own light. That is not a small thing. It may be the most significant thing that has ever happened on this world, and we are living inside it, right now, in this very moment, as the fire we lit goes streaming out toward the stars. So we keep watching, we keep listening, we keep wondering, and we keep that small fire burning at the edge of the great dark forest, unsure whether we have done something wonderful or something foolish, knowing only that we could not have done otherwise, because it is simply not in us to sit forever in the dark without reaching for the light. And the oldest question remains, hanging over us as it has hung over every human being who ever lived, more alive now than it has ever been. Are we alone? Is the forest empty? Or is it full of others as careful and as curious as ourselves? Somewhere out there, beyond the last light we know, is there someone, in this very instant, turning toward our small blue world, catching the first faint glow of the fire we lit, and wondering, just as we are wondering, whether they too are alone? We do not know. We may not know for a very long time, but the search for that answer, the listening, the wondering, the reaching out across the beautiful and terrifying dark, has not ended with these words. In truth, it has only just begun.